Hello, Jonathan. Welcome to Grow with Flow. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Not bad, not bad at all. Thank you so much for joining me. So those who are listening, Jonathan is founder and CEO of Rocket Talent. Jonathan, can you introduce Rocket Talent and let us know what you do?
Yeah. So we are a recruitment agency, executive search firm that focuses primarily on connecting growth talent with technology-driven B2C and B2B SaaS companies. We kind of focus a lot within the digital sphere and building out their growth engines to drive revenue all across the United States. So we really focus on that niche. It's a little bit different on the D2C side than for B2B, but at the end of the day, it's all about driving revenue and growth, and that's our specialty.
Perfect. So when did you get started with Rocket?
Great question. So started the company end of 2016 and really picked things up around 2017 is when I went like fully solo. And yeah, I've been at it since.
Yeah, perfect. And have you always been focused on doing revenue and growth roles, or did you focus on some other niche and pivoted into this one?
Great question. So initially we were really, my background prior to working at Rocket or starting Rocket, I was in talent for a number of years, actually started on the technology side. So I was doing a lot of technology driven roles at an agency, then went in-house for a number of years. And that's where I got exposure to more like revenue roles and, growth roles and things of that nature, and really kind of doing anything a startup would need, from, deep engineering roles to a CIO to chief marketing officer type of stuff. So kind of more initially when I started off my own, became like the startup guy, honestly, was helping startups find mostly director and above talent. And that's how I initially got started, just reaching out to my immediate relationship, seeing who I knew, and was like, sure, I'll help you, right? No, not very strategic, if I'm being 100% honest.
Yeah, that's how businesses start, right? So it can start dirty, and you scale up from there. So Jonathan, as long as I've known you, and I've known you for quite a while now, you worked with a variety of different coaches, right? So what value have these coaches brought to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I first got started on my own, it was really scary. I quit my corporate gig. I wasn't really sure, if this was going to work, and, decided, hey, I'm going to do this. So, quit making a comfortable salary of 6+ figures, and it's like, hey, let me try to do this completely on my own. And obviously was used to this because when I started in the industry, I was pretty much working completely off of commission. But it's been some time, and you doubt yourself. And so after about like my first year of doing this on my own, you realize that, especially working for yourself, there's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons. The cons being that you are only accountable to yourself, and kind of buckling down and having someone to drive ideas off of, and seeing what success looks like, and having some type of roadmap to follow was really helpful for me, right? And it just kind of, rather than coming in with all that like agita or anxiety of like, do I know what I'm doing? Is this going to be right? You kind of have that North Star, even if you don't know if it's going to work. And so that was really, really helpful. And I think as I've evolved, I found different coaches to meet me where I was, right? And you learn through those experiences.
Sure. So right now, right, where is Rocket Talent? How large is the team? What stage you are on? Can you give us a little bit more idea about that?
100%. So we're still in, I would say, for revenue, from what I take, we're probably like close to the size of like a 10, 12 person shop, but we just run it really lean. So today we're closer to, it's me full-time here in the US. I have a few part-time contractors here in the US that help, but the majority of the team is overseas. So I have about 3 to 4 full-time in overseas today. And as of right now, I'm the only full-time employee in the United States. But yeah, so I guess you would still very much call us in startup mode, but with a lot more efficiencies than I would say a lot of companies.
You're right, and it's hard, doing this alone, and especially when you have a remote team. You mentioned 4 people working overseas, right? So what are the challenges that came with that? I'm sure it wasn't easy, and not the most natural choice to begin with.
Yeah, so I mean, look, when you're trying to compete with bigger firms, I think in general, most recruitment models are broken, right? Like your average recruiter that's doing a full desk is doing everything from, sourcing to screening to administrative work and scheduling, to presenting candidates, negotiation, both on the client and candidate side, then hunting to new business. It's really inefficient across the board, right? So we've tried to really create functions where like I can focus almost 100% on revenue. And I have a team that sets me up behind the scenes that does all those little bits and pieces behind the scenes. So we have a team dedicated to doing all the administrative and scheduling, both scheduling appointments for me, it's simple stuff like going through my calendar, getting set up with candidates, but also scheduling candidates as they go through the process. Then we have a separate team that is like more on the sourcing side, and we identify sourcing on more so on the like identifying, finding like really qualified, leads, not just like ripping a bunch of leads off of a basic LinkedIn search. So really kind of understanding a search really, really holistically, and doing a lot of that legwork and making sure that you're filling up your pipeline and organizing the database according to. And then, of course, similarly, you would find on your client side, there's like a whole team that does that. And then we have someone separate that does the same administrative person actually does like the enrichment, finding all the candidate information for outreach and enriching all the information, whether it's, for email, text, or phone. And then we have a separate person that kind of started off doing a lot of those things, specifically on the identifying and sourcing side, that now helps with some of the initial conversations before it gets escalated, to the next round. In a nutshell, like it's how do I maximize my time and do all the things that are important, but not necessarily 100% revenue generating, so that I could be doing what I'm best at, whether that's calling people, getting them on the phone, talking to candidates, closing and selling, right? And outsourcing all the essentials that are very crucial, more painful work. And we initially started doing that with like various BPOs, and we've gone through our own trials and tribulations with that, right? Like, I think a lot of people that hear about outsourcing initially think like they're going to hand it over to someone, they claim they're experts, and it's going to go super smooth, right? No matter what niche you're in, every niche is done differently. All the requirements are done differently. And oftentimes a lot of these BPOs don't get much of an investment or training. So you have to put time into them if you're going to work with them. You have to kind of view it as a process. And so we've gone through that, right? Process of like figuring out what works, banging our head against the wall. Initially my first few leads I found were on Upwork, and bit by bit kind of outsource different things of the business, right? I think at first the easiest thing to outsource was like candidate scheduling, right? Found someone that was like really good at that, and putting candidates on my schedule, and putting clients on my schedule that would get back to me and things like that, and just some of those follow-ups. And then from there it was like, all right, what's the next thing I need to maximize my time in kind of, I never read the book fully, like the 4-Hour Workweek, but kind of took what I knew from it and like to apply it to different pieces of like the recruitment process. And we're still iterating and going. But it hasn't been easy. It really hasn't been easy. There's failures I've made as like a manager. There's failures I've made of like picking the wrong people. There's, and then you just iterate and learn and get better and improve and, to tweak the process more and more and more.
Perfect. And so with the focus that you end up spending most of your time towards small revenue generating activities, so high value activities other than admin and things that are important to keep the machine going, but not necessarily the best use of time as far as revenue generation is concerned, right? So I think it sounds, I'm sure it was much more difficult than how easy you make it sound. If somebody is going about doing that, what are some of the common mistakes you would advise them to avoid?
It really depends on your budget. I would say hire smart people, like hire committed people. Obviously you have a budget and you need to stick to it, but I think you can find people at like a reasonable budget and make sure that you can see like their ability to process information and like quickly process information. I think a lot of times people think they can hire like sourcers from the Upworks of the world and that they're going to get like an expert that just knows their industry. No matter what I've seen most of the time, even if someone who's like claiming to do sourcing or lead generation, you need a lot of handholding in the beginning. You're going to need to teach them your niche. You're going to need to teach them what matters. And if you're really good at this and you want to differentiate yourself from your competitors, you're not just sending, based on industry, title, location. Like you really got to teach them how to synthesize a profile and all the little things that aren't being necessarily said or being kind of hidden on there and how to, synthesize that, right? And so one question we always ask is, what makes a good candidate to you? Like, what are the attributes you look for? And I just wanted to see, like, are they just telling me what tags they see on a resume or what like keywords they're searching for? Or do they actually know what these things mean? Right. And I guess luckily enough, since I've recruited for a variety of different roles, whether it's engineering or not, you can be like, all right, you're looking at it and you said you've done IT. Walk me through what a good developer look like. And if that's what the person has been doing for 2 years and they don't know, you try to figure out, okay, did they just never get the training? Or, they just never took the time to learn, or just like something, right? And can they learn that information? Do they want to learn? How hungry are they? For us, that's really important because we're constantly switching, it obviously helps to know certain roles really, really well and have a niche, but sometimes our clients will come to us for something that's a bit obscure. And you will need people on your team that can think for themselves or that can understand it and learn, right? And not just, any role you're going to have the nuances of the title, right? That it's not just black and white growth marketer or this. It's like figuring out what they really do in between. And so I think that's one thing we've learned is, can people synthesize and can they process information? Do they have that curiosity? The basics of looking at their work performance history. Are they technically savvy, right? Like one of my first hires I made was she was great. She was a go-getter, but I took for granted, like all these different softwares that we're using, how easy it is, how all these little things that we're using, these Chrome extensions or this or that. And someone that is not super strong with computers, it's going to take them like 3 times to do something that it would take someone who's just computer native really quickly to figure out, right? So you got to have to learn what works for you, right? And what doesn't. And then from there, you kind of have experience and can improve. The other thing I would argue, it just depends on where you are. Like, some of my first people I hired were part-time with me, right? And I realized quickly, I just want someone that's dedicated to Rocket. And that doesn't work. And honestly, it hasn't really worked for like, it works for maybe a few roles if you're looking for like a content writer or something of that nature, and you only need to like generate just a little bit of content each month. Then I think in certain cases, it definitely makes sense. But when you really are trying to build a core essential to you driving revenue, you got to invest in that yourself. And it could be that you get a great BPO and they're awesome and they train people and you find a great partner through them. Or it could be that you just need to hire them directly, right?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. So right now it's you. You got full time over here, and you've got a few people over here who are working full time. So, and it's been around 2017. So about 6 years since you started, roughly.
Yeah.
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 So, and last 3-4 years have been pretty wild in technology industry. So, what have those 3-4 years been for Rocket?
Yeah, they've been pretty good. I think from when I first met you, I don't know if it was the end of 2019 or early 2020. I don't remember the exact date, but that's right around maybe 6 months before we made a hard pivot and focused primarily just on growth, right? And it kind of just to some extent fell in our lap, but also just made a lot of sense. Like we were doing a lot of product roles. We were really trying to find our product market fit. And then I just kept getting calls to fill growth roles, right? And towards the end of my time as a full in-house like talent acquisition person, majority of the role at my most recent company was building out their growth team. So I really learned it and like kind of knew it and didn't even realize like how well I knew it. And through those relationships, people were like, go to Jonathan. He's awesome at filling these digital, marketing growth roles. And it was just starting to like become a thing, growth. And I made some calls and like as I kept getting kind of like inbound leads to fill those types of roles and was like, shit, this is what we got to do. Like it just seems obvious. And we doubled down and went from there. Naturally, some of the clients that knew us that we had some longstanding relationships with calls for roles here or there, and we had to be picky and like decide if it doesn't make sense for us to take them or not. I think every business has to make that decision of like, is this the right client? You don't want to veer too off the spectrum. And there was times where we declined roles. There's times where we took roles and then we realized after filling them, like that was a waste. It was great, but we're not going to do that again, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And you just kind of live and you learn. So, 2020 was like an awesome start. We had a bunch of things lined up from the end of 2019. Then COVID hit. It was super scary. I was fortunate enough where I was like, who the hell knows what's going on? But was like comfortable because we had such a strong first quarter. And by the time things got really serious, it was already like towards the end of Q1. And I decided to move the company from New York to Texas. And that was mostly just due to like, I was sick of being in a concrete jungle and all that. And didn't really know what the future entailed, but I knew for sure that like this thing was going to be around for a while. And I didn't have to, a lot of the relationships I had were New York based. So I probably wouldn't need to be there to meet people. And Austin was like a good hub in between. Loved the warm weather. So I moved there and pretty quickly, like after, I think it was like a few days after I got there, like, there was like that down pattern where there was a lot of indecisiveness. Nobody knew what was going on. And come like June, things really started to pick up. And that was right around the time I moved. So it was pretty exciting. And luckily we were in a good situation where we had some roles that, we closed right as like things got really scary and a few clients that were still hiring, it wasn't crazy. And then come June, things like really picked up. And then come beginning of 2021, it was like a breakout year for us, even further, we 4X'd. And then 2022 is a little bit down from 2021. I made some changes and, at that point I had 2 people, here in the US working with me that I brought on. I was like, how do we scale this? And they were great. But it was what I needed at the time, if that makes sense. And we parted ways with them. And then, look, 2023, even towards the middle of last year, we've seen a bit of that like downturning, right? We were very fortunate. We're like 2020, 2021, first half of 2022. We were still growing, 2X year over year. but with zero, like very minimal effort on prospecting and hunting new business, right? It was more organic than anything else. And so we were just, super busy with a lot of referrals that were coming in, and we kind of built a nice niche for ourselves. People referring us, candidates that were like bringing us in that were like, oh, you guys are awesome. And they were in hiring positions. So I call that like more the organic way. And then I would say this year, a lot more hustle. We still have a ton of like organic business, but we really have to pick up that more outbound engine to drive the numbers that we want to be driving.
Sure.
And that's been a learning curve for me as well. Just like anything that's a little bit newer. I laugh and say like I'm a great recruiter and maybe not the best like BD person, but I probably don't give myself enough credit.
Oh, well, that's true with almost every founder that I have interacted. We have a way of really underestimating ourselves. I think that's our coping mechanism to kind of go all in, work really, really hard, and find a way to succeed. So let's change gear a little bit, right? It's tough time, right? Like at least for technology as an industry, we are also increasingly looking at more and more recruiting and staffing businesses slowing down or shrinking. What's your outlook looking for? What's your outlook like for second half of 23, early 24? What do you think?
Look, I don't think anyone has like the crystal ball here.
Yeah.
If they did, they probably wouldn't be in this business and they'd be doing something else. I think the benefit of being in this industry, you kind of see where there's trends and what's going on and what's not, especially if you kind of really know your industry or like adjacent industries. So, at the end of the day, I do think that if you're there is a talent shortage and great candidates aren't growing on trees, right? And so I think there was a lot of like bloat that happened, in the last few years, and a lot of candidates that were getting, salaries that honestly weren't realistic, long term. And to some extent, it separates like the amateurs from the professionals. And so, not to say that there's not really talented individuals that are getting let go, but like in the field that we're in within like marketing, product, analytics, depending on, I'm sure everyone in those fields at some companies is being let go, but usually companies are keeping their top performers, right? Unless they're just doing completely imploding and getting rid of everyone. They need to keep the ones that aren't, they're still growing it, or they're looking to like re-up the whole team and replace the team. And to some extent, 2 years ago when the market was so competitive, they might have only been able to get XYZ in talent because, everybody and their mother was hiring, that they really only got like a B player, B plus player, right? And now they can potentially up level and get someone better because it's a bit more of a client market than it was, or a lot more of a client market than it was. So I think, yes, it's definitely a tighter market. I think you just have to figure out where the niches are, and you got to put the time into it, and get creative and figure out like what your clients need. Where are they hiring? What are they looking for? Is it different industries that are hiring? Is it, different spaces? Like some of the industries that some of our clients that I would have never expected to be hiring this year, that like historically, if you look at, or even generally speaking, are like not doing as well due to the economic changes, are coming to us in hiring, right? And like, I don't have an answer. Why? I don't know. I don't try to think about it. So it's really just a numbers game, man. And how many marketing presentations or sales presentations you need to give to win a piece of retained business, that number is obviously going to go up to like how many sales presentations to winning, versus in a better market, you probably have to do maybe half to get the numbers you want to get. So unfortunately, you have to work a little bit harder. But I think that, there's there. In terms of like, if I had to guess, I think you're starting. If I had to guess, I think we're in this for a little bit. They say it happens every 10 years. I'm definitely no economist, so I'm not going to, unfortunately, I think a lot of the stuff is beyond me, but I think every 10, 12 years, there needs to be there is a correction, and we're just seeing that now, right? And COVID was like a short-term Band-Aid, and for a lot of folks, some industries are doing really well. Like if you're in hospitality, you were probably crushed during COVID, and now you're back at it. So it just depends. I think the good thing is that if you are in technology and you are in a niche and you are in innovating, recruiting for innovative roles, whether it's, technology related to manufacturing, whether it's product, whether it's design, whether it's marketing, a lot of these roles are highly analytical, they're super skilled, and there's just in general shortage of superb talent. And so if you really want to differentiate yourself, I think that just goes into the niche. I'm a big believer in being niche. You got to know your market, and you got to know who the A+ players are better than anybody to identify them versus being a generalist. Because they know what your market needs, you can identify them faster, you know who they are. And especially when there's like tighter markets, it might not be that it could be still more a client market, but like good luck trying to sift through all the crap.
Sure.
Right. And even if they have time to do it, doesn't mean they're going to be successful, right? So it's really just about persistence and differentiating who you are.
Right. So you started using Recruiterflow. I think we had our first conversation exactly 4 years back, if I'm not wrong. It was August 2019. And what made you move to Recruiterflow in the first place?
Yeah, so I was on the market for something. When I first started, in the very, very beginning, I was just using like Google Docs, and then I was starting to use like Luxo, which is kind of similar to Recruiterflow. And we quickly got off of Luxo. I felt like I was just kind of sold something, and then the customer service wasn't really there. Like, and with any tool, you don't know what to look for until you like really get in there. And then we were on a year contract with Crelate, and it was definitely decent, but I just felt like it was a little funky, and a lot of the changes that I wanted to make just weren't really there. So, look, any of these tools, whether you're a sales professional, recruiting professional, like they're not perfect. You got to figure out what makes sense for you. It's sometimes easy to get like tricked by like the shiny figures or the shiny object stuff, and but versus like really figuring out what you need. So I was definitely looking to see if there was something out there, and I felt like there was a shortage. And I was hungry for it, and I didn't know even where to look. I was like, I can't go up to Bullhorn. It's too stodgy. It takes forever. It's not user friendly. I knew a lot of people that were using Zoho, and I felt similarly about that. I had a bunch of friends in sales that were using, like the HubSpots and Salesforces of the world, and I was like, I don't have the time to learn how to code and do that. So I was looking for something that was a bit more out of the box. Even honestly experimented with like Pipedrive. And then, I don't know, I was on G2 or something like that. And I was like looking up different tools and going. And I just started like right-clicking and new tabbing like the different ones that looked interesting. And then I stumbled upon you guys. And as I was like looking at your webpage, I was like, all right, this kind of is like checking off a lot of the boxes here. Like, this is really neat. And then once I got off the call with you guys, I was like, holy shit. And I was really impressed. So I kind of found you, interestingly enough, and because I was like hungry for something different, and in my spare time was a big enough geek to like put that effort in, right? And it's hard to like navigate it and find, because a lot of the stuff that I was seeing was like the traditional stuff like iSIMS or PC Hunter, and I've heard people say really good things about those tools, especially if they've been on them for a while. They kind of stick with them. It's obviously harder to move off of things once you're like kind of plugged in. You have that stickiness effect. But yeah, so wasn't really loving Crelate, wasn't hating it, but just felt like what I wanted to do. And what I loved about Recruiterflow was the open API. I knew that the team, luckily from recruiting back in the day, tech folks, I knew that anybody who was like IIT was like a genius. And so I was like, what other, engineering team and founders were all like a bunch of, for India's equivalents, Harvard guys. Like, good luck finding that in any other recruitment SaaS, platform that's selling to SMBs. And we spoke and just kind of hit it off, and it was, the best decision I've made.